Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for my first episode of Brand New Gig, where we will be covering all things Texas A&M. And because kickoff is only 9 days away, what better to start with than Texas A&M football? Luckily, I have a guest with me for my first show today. I am joined by Kannon Torres. He covers all things recruiting on the Bell Tower Patreon, and he's also the co-host of the Voice of College Football, Texas Aggies Live. Thank you for joining me today, Kannon, and we are very happy to have you.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
Perfect. So before we dig into all things Texas A&M, I actually have a segment that we are going to start every show with, and it is called Off the Ledge. So I am going to get into some things that people are concerned about on the timeline. I asked people what are their biggest concerns going into Texas A&M football this year, and as the season progresses, we will go game by game. But it's been a very long 9 months, 8 months since we've had college football, so there's a lot to be worried about, but a lot to be happy about. So we are hoping to maybe address people's concerns and just talk people off the ledge. And a disclaimer for this segment: we are not licensed therapists, so we cannot be held liable for any diagnoses that are wrong or any coping mechanisms that may be deemed ineffective. So we're going to cover three today. We're not going to get too deep into them because we have a lot to cover later in the show. First one, this might be one that we can't do much about, but I think the biggest one on everyone's radar is injuries. How do you think we can ease people's worries about injuries that have plagued our seasons year after year after year?
Well, I think back to last year preseason, I think it was August, where we got the news that we had lost both Tyreek Chappelle and Ruben Owens before the first game of the season. Now, those were two big blows because Tyreek Chappelle was slotted as that starting nickel corner, and Ruben Owens was this up and coming, hey, we are ready for this 5-star running back to kind of break out with Le'Veon Moss and Amari Daniels. We were super excited to have that trio of running backs back there. But I think to ease people's concerns, I think every single year, I forget what the exact stat is, but you're going to have injury concerns on any team no matter what, especially in the SEC. Now, I don't think it'll be as drastic as what you saw last year along the offensive line, where you had multiple people go down, especially trying to shuffle people over to that center position, trying to see exactly how you could kind of revamp that offensive line. And we've seen during these preseason practices so far that a lot, and I mean a lot of the offensive linemen all along, because they have so much depth this year, they're all taking reps at center. They're all taking reps at right guard. It doesn't matter if you're playing left tackle. We've had reports come out that even Trey Zune, who has been slated to be an all SEC preseason like offensive lineman on the outside, he's been taking some reps at center, and that is just for them, or even two people go down. These people's concerns, maybe. I do think that I have seen the trend of Elko now recruiting the athlete a lot more than he's recruiting, the 5-star player or the specific player to play one position. He wants to get those monsters on the athletic side and then figure it out when they get to campus. So I think that's where my mind turns to in terms of the athletic prowess that they could have and to kind of help them with their injury situation down the line.
Do you think the Tommy Moffitt method has anything to do with hoping to see a lot less injuries, especially when it comes to the quarterback curse, or do you think it's just luck of the draw?
When you say quarterback curse, what exactly do you mean?
Not having a healthy quarterback last a full year since Kellen Mond.
Gotcha. We're dating all the way back there then. uh, Now, the Moffitt method, I mean, people have heard about it so far, especially as soon as he was hired. I think a lot of people kind of took notice and like, hey, this is something we're kind of not exactly used to seeing under the previous regime. But now that a lot of these guys have had a full offseason in the same program, so a lot of these guys are having a second year under Tommy Moffitt's tutelage. He knows exactly what he wants out of these guys to get to the next level. he brought a lot of these guys back in order to have them become NFL draft picks. I mean, that's the main reason a lot of these people came back. I mean, you could have had guys like Armaj Reed Adams go to the draft and potentially be a late round selection, but now he's kind of being slated as this, projected day one or day two pick. So a lot of that does go along with the Moffitt method, and I do think that it does have a part to play in how the injuries can be taken care of. I do think a lot of it is called a strength and conditioning program. I think during the season, you're going to see a lot more of that conditioning. Meanwhile, we've seen a lot more of the preseason and spring training be more strength coaching.
Right. I think going along with that, a lot of it is our depth pieces. And I think a big thing that we brought in from the transfer portal this year was wide receiver. And that was another concern I saw is, are these wide receivers slated to actually perform and live up to the hype that has been going on this offseason?
I would say, like, off the top of my head, I would say yes. I mean, I think a lot of Aggies are going to try and say, people are going to beat around the bush and give them a long-winded answer. My answer is usually just either yes or no in a lot of these situations. So I would say yes. A lot of the people, especially around social media, message boards, everything along those lines around Texas A&M was, why can't these wide receivers kind of get that separation or kind of become that next level receiver for A&M? And I had to kind of quell some expectations that they could, not everyone is going to be a wide receiver one, especially in year one under a new head coach. I mean, you brought in guys like Cyrus Allen, Jabri Barber, who, even though they had the talent on their level, I think that a lot of the times you are trying to find those hidden guys. And now in year two, you bring in guys like Casey Concepcion, who I have been raving about for the past 2 years. I have tweets that date back 2 years when he's kind of being brought in, this really, really under recruited guy over to NC State. I mean, NC State was probably the only one that was kind of making headway. He didn't get a usual recruitment. He really only got to visit North Carolina State. I think there was some quotes by him some time ago that he wanted to visit North Carolina, try and see what Mac Brown was all about. But other than Casey Concepcion, I mean, now this year, you don't have a wide receiver other than true freshman Jerome Miles, who are above, I believe, 6'3". So you don't really have this point of attack, 10-yard down the field wide receiver like you had this past year in Noah Thomas. You have a lot of guys that are just overall dynamic. And that's what I want people to focus on, is that all of these wide receivers in this room are now dynamic, especially with wide receiver coach Holman Wiggins. I think getting that training a full year under their belt, at the very least, has been very, very monumental for them.
I think our going into our third concern is, I think definitely this is where everyone's mind is on the opposite side of the ball, especially when it comes to secondary. What kind of copium do you have to offer people when it comes to that position group?
The copium, I would say, is a Mike Elko-led secondary, especially in a year where he himself not only threw himself under the bus, but kind of took control and said he was not going to let what was happening at the end of that USC game, and really what was happening the last 4 games of the season, happen again. So he took back those play calling duties. He's going to be more involved, is what he specifically said. And I think we've seen a lot of quotes around players like Des Ricks, around players like Will Lee, who have said that his vocal leadership on that defensive side, and his vocal leadership has been kind of what's been pushing them so far, and that they have taken that next step into kind of realizing what exactly a Mike Elko-led defense is. And I think back to what were they going to improve on? What did it mean for Mike Elko when he said he was going to take control? And I think that now looking back, I think it was the hire of Lyle Hemphill from James Madison. It's a guy who understands exactly what Mike Elko is trying to run, because he does run a lot of specific nickel formations. He runs a lot of 4-2-5. He's going to run a lot of those DBs. So if those DBs aren't going to be acting exactly how they need to and understand those coverages better on those receivers, it's not going to be, plainly put, what he wants for Aggie football this coming season. So the hire of Lyle Hemphill and the vocal leadership he has had in these practices so far has come a long way. And I don't think it'll be the same, not even remotely close, of what you saw this past year.
I think you covered it pretty well, and our off-the-record therapy should hopefully ease people's tensions a little bit. I know you can only do so much until you actually get on the field. So with that being said, I think this week one is very different than last year's week one because we have a little bit more room, a little bit more leeway to kind of test out what's working. You're not jumping right into playing who was going to be the national championship runner-ups. So what are you expecting to see out of A&M come the UTSA game? What are some things that you're really looking forward to that maybe we didn't have the chance to mess around with last year?
I don't think I have many expectations going into that first game, but I do have a lot of things I'm looking forward to. I think now that I get to see a fully healthy offensive line with a running back room that can go 4 deep. I don't think people realize how monumental that is to have in the SEC, to have this much experience in that running back room with this experience of an offensive line. I fell in love with how Michigan ran the ball for their championship year. I mean, I got to see Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum and those guys kind of just run over anybody they wanted. And I think that's the style that the Aggies are going to have this coming season, where it's not always going to be this kind of take the top off of a defense, have all of these explosive plays. I think you're going to have a lot of drives where it's going to be 10 to 12 plays, and it's going to be a march of 70, 75 yards down the field. And I, for one, get really excited when it comes to that. Maybe that's just my fault at heart. Maybe I'm a Big 12, reminiscent at heart, because that's a lot of what the Big 12 is nowadays. But that's the thing I'm looking forward to in this game is I finally get to see all these running backs on the field be these dynamic runners, playmakers, and I finally get to see Le'Veon Moss back on the field as well.
I think you covered it very well. One big thing we're going to talk about through the rest of the season, probably, as long as we can stay healthy, is the depth on our team. And I think with last year, with all our injuries, with Marcel Reed coming in halfway through the year, we didn't get to see Colin Klein's full playbook. I think a lot of people were kind of on the outs about him at the end of the year because of how the season kind of collapsed. But I, for one, don't think that was the offense that lost us a lot of big games. And two, I know when Colin Klein was hired, all of the Kansas State fans were super angry. So I was super excited about the hire. I think coming into this year, he can open the playbook a lot more, knowing that Marcel Reed is our quarterback one, knowing that we have depth at running back, wide receiver, and tight end. So I'm hoping to see a lot more creativity and seeing a lot of different sets when we go into that UTSA game. I don't need it to be a 60-point blowout. Would that be exciting? Sure. But I think you have the flexibility to play around a little bit and see what works best, who works best where. So I am very much looking forward to having that chip off of our shoulder as opposed to last year. With that being said, there are still some question marks. I think more so on the defensive side of the ball. I think where everyone's going to be on the offensive side of the ball is pretty set. We know who our starting 11 is going to be there. Who do you think are going to fill in the blanks on both sides of the ball? Feel free to cover either one that people may not know about, that people that are going to get a lot of reps that we just didn't see last year, big names that we should expect to see game after game.
Well, when I think of people who need to fill gaps, I first have to think of, well, why were those gaps left? And I think of those 3 defensive linemen that left for the NFL draft. So you lost players like Nick Skirton, Shamar Stewart, and Shamar Turner. That's a lot of talent to be losing on that defensive line, especially with a pass rush how it was, with the talent that it had. So who is coming in to backfill those spots? And you saw them go into the transfer portal and grab at least, I believe the total number was 4+ defensive linemen, 3 of them being edge rushers. So I think the first one that comes to mind is Deion Hayes from Colorado. This is a guy that Colorado and Dion took because of his talent that he had over at Pitt. Now, unfortunately, he did get injured over when he was with Colorado. They didn't get to see the full capabilities that he had. But from all of the camp intel that I've heard, is that Deon Hayes might be one of those starters along those edge spots and actually be one of the more pure pass rushers that we've kind of seen here. He may not be the ultimate run stopper, but I think that Deon Hayes is going to be one of those guys along the edge that people are going to be like, wait, I don't recognize that person. I think you will come Notre Dame, to be honest. I think that that's how much of an impact. I feel like that's how fast people are going to be able to recognize where he's along that defensive line. And opposite him, I mean, Cassius Howell was a playmaker for the Aggies this past year. It just so happened that he was also playing with the talent of, Skirton, Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart. So this year, he finally gets to spread his wings a little bit, show exactly who he is. And he's one of the players that I think has benefited going back to those Moffitt methods. He has benefited tremendously from being in this offseason program. He had great numbers when he came over from Bowling Green. He doesn't have the numbers on paper, but I think the advanced stats say that he is probably one of the better pass rushers in all of the SEC this coming year. So I am very, very excited when it comes to that edge rushing group. Even up the middle, too, you're going to have a lot of experience with guys like Tyler Onyedim from Iowa State and a lot of experience coming from Albert Regis as well. I think those guys I'm super excited for, and I'm ready to see it on the field.
I would definitely agree. I think that was a big piece. I think if you're not following A&M football and just kind of look at the overall consensus of college football, you see that A&M loses 3 guys to the draft. So I think you would be expected to see a lot of production decline. But obviously, anyone who follows knows there's been a lot of good intel coming out of fall camp, knows we got a lot of guys out of the portal. Guys we already have on our team with experience. We can expect guys like Albert Regis and DJ Hicks to hopefully live up to that veteran status and show us a little bit more of what they're capable of. And I think something we've already covered too is the secondary. A lot of that was thinned with injury last year, but I mean, you do a little trade with Georgia, Noah Thomas for Julian Humphrey. So I'm very excited to see him split reps with Des Ricks, who probably is not a favorable name if you watched the bowl game last year, but we've heard a lot of high praise about him coming out of fall camp, especially from Jay Bateman and Mike Elko. So that's a position that I think is a big question mark and obviously will need to be addressed come game time, but one that I think we filled very well. On top of all that, obviously there are big names on both sides of the ball, more so on offense. You have Le'Veon Moss coming back, Ruben Owens. If you had to pick one name for each side of the ball who you think will be the face of our starting 11, who would those guys be?
On both sides of the ball, who's going to be the face? I think the easy answer is on defense with Tarian York. The leadership that he brings, I think, is not one to be understated. I'm trying to think of how to word this, but Tarian York is a captain for a reason. All of the members of that defensive group listen to him. And this is a guy that they started as a true freshman coming out of high school as a 3-star recruit. I think that's exactly what A&M needed. And that's exactly why he's been kind of climbing up these NFL draft talk ranks for this next season. That's why he is being graded as one of the best run stoppers in all of college football. Not just the SEC, but all of college football. He is an absolute leader, and he is going to be the face of the Aggies on that defensive side of the ball. The offensive side, I think it's not necessarily who's going to come out as the leader. I think it's already been chosen for him, and I think that's Marcel Reed. Now, Marcel last year was not put in the most advantageous of situations, but honestly did make the most of it. He came in for an injured Connor Wigman, and he was only told he was going to be the starter only moments before the start of the Florida game, which I don't know because I haven't been in that situation myself, but I wonder what was running through his head when that call came about. And he performed very, very well in that game. We've all seen the highlights. And that Florida team turned out to be very good come the end of the season. So I think getting these reps in this off-season program, whatever it is the Moffitt method is, I know he's put on 10 plus pounds. I know he's kind of gotten rid of the dip in his throwing arm that people not necessarily were trashing, but were kind of critiquing it on social media, even though they are not quarterback coaches. He has grown exponentially in this offseason training program. And I think that you're going to have two sides of the ball with him and Torian York have that leadership. And I think leadership is one of those traits in Aggies that is talked about a lot. And you definitely need to have that this coming year, because without that leadership, I don't know how far you're going to make it in a slate like this, because you have a lot of the home games at the start of the season and you're going to go on a tough road stretch towards the end of the season. So I think getting those valuable reps in these first couple of games and then playing an extremely tough defense, it's an extremely tough secondary. I have them graded as one of the top 3 secondaries in all of college football in Notre Dame. I think that those reps are going to be vital for what Marcel Reed is going to be bringing to this program.
I think going into Notre Dame, especially, Notre Dame is a team that has historically had a very defensive identity. And I think that's typically been our MO as well, not maybe so much recently, but I mean, you have the Wrecking Crew and you have a defensive-minded head coach. Do you think we will go back to that Wrecking Crew identity? Are we going to lean more on Maroon Goons on the offensive side of the ball? I mean, you have leadership on both ends. Do you think A&M will lean on one side more than the other, or will it be fairly split?
I think that the natural lean is going to be on the offensive group. So my default answer is going to be the Maroon Goons of the offensive line, because you're going to have more of these sustained, longer periods of drives where you are grinding down the field and maybe have a couple of explosive plays, but that's not the overall goal. The overall goal is to score the football, get those quality touchdowns that you're going to want in these games, and just grind it out. Just completely wear out opponents on the offensive side so that your defense is well rested, able to come in and perform 100% of what they want to do. We saw it a lot this past year already. We got glimpses of it with Colin Klein's offense. He was a top 5 SEC offense his first year. Like, put it plainly, I don't think people realize how much they were they were trashing Colin Klein's offensive schemes too much. I do think that he performed honestly to what expectations should have been in year 1. And I think this year too, now that considerable jump from what experience he has is going to be great. I think you're going to lean along those offensive groups, especially the running back. You can sub in anybody you want pretty much.
I think obviously I think anyone who watches college football cares about the quarterback more than any other position. Obviously, the O-line is not a fun or exciting thing to talk about. A&M fans have a lot of faith in it, but I think outside of that, just in the college football world as a whole, everyone's looking at Marcel Reed. You see it all over Twitter. Marcel Reed is not a passer. The question is, does he need to be a passer? Not necessarily does he need to improve the vertical threat, but does his identity need to be as a passer?
That's a tough question, because part of me wants to say yes, but another part of me knows that it's not going to be that simple. And I think now that in this specific scheme that they're going to have, Marcel Reed can become a passer. I think the overall goal is for him to make the more critical decisions. So I think that's going to be my open-ended answer of, I think he's going to become a decision maker. I don't think he's going to become a passer or runner. I think he's going to become a critical decision maker. So we're going to see him make the exact right reads that A&M is going to need to sustain these long drives, and honestly get a lot more explosivity out of it to these wide receivers that they got. I mean, you saw a lot of people all over social media talking about how Mario Craver can take the top off of defenses when you're not ready for it, because you're going to lull these opponents into these long-winded drives, you're not going to expect that he's going to be 20 yards behind your safety already. So I think that's what I think of. I think he needs to be a more critical decision maker, especially in these first couple of games.
I think that is a big question mark. I am on the belief that at the end of the season, we don't need to look at Marcel Reed and have his identity be passing. I think the passing game needs to improve drastically. I think with the wide receiver room and even the tight end room that we have, that needs to be a threat, ball in the air just as much as ball on the ground. But I think with Marcel Reed being thrown into the Florida game, it was clear right off the jump that his strength is on the ground. I mean, you watched the Florida game. Everyone in here probably watched the Florida game. You saw him get thrown in there. He gets the ball. I mean, Marcel Reed did not make an announcer moan on TV because he threw a 40-yard dot to Noah Thomas. It was because he juked a guy out with his feet. I mean, part of that comes with growing up playing basketball, I'm sure, just the athleticism and being kind of tall and long and skinny. But I don't think his identity needs to be a passer. Does his passing need to improve? Yes. But I don't think that is his strength, and it doesn't need to be his strength. So we will see what Colin Klein decides to do with Marcel and how much he's improved in that area. But I don't think he needs to have an A-plus passing game for us to see more success this year than we did last year.
No, he can definitely make those considerable strides to be a better passer. But I think when you think of those expectations you have for another QB in the same system from one year to another, I think that a lot of fans are trying to see, and even more people down the line are trying to see exactly what he's going to take in another year under the same system. It doesn't necessarily be this like Heisman level jump that a lot of people want out of a lot of quarterbacks who come in. I think that that's the other side of fandom, is that you expect your players to be at the 10 out of 10 level. You want them to be at all times. So I think that they're right in a way, but I am more looking forward to him just taking those strides as a better decision maker and passer.
I firmly agree. And again, it's just going to be going to have to be something we take game by game. I think looking at our identity as a whole and what people know A&M as, it is the age-old 8-4, and that is just something that we haven't let people believe anything other than, because that's all we've been known to show. I mean, I think the only time we had a better record than that was our COVID season, which, again, that's a whole other thing. But what would you say? I don't know how many points you want to give. Give maybe one or two things that need to happen for us to break the 8-4 ceiling.
Just one or two things. Well, I think we've talked about it already. I think that defensive back consistency is what needs to change, because you have these games against these elite SEC quarterbacks right now, and they could not be elite for all we know. I mean, we've seen certain things come from Lenore Sellers, DJ Lagway. I think Garrett Nussmeier is going to be one of the hardest quarterbacks they have to face, especially going into Baton Rouge. But I think that defensive back consistency is what's going to be one of those things that helps them break that and get over that hump. 8-4, while it's not optimal, it's also not bad. And I think that's not exactly the spot you want to be in terms of purgatory in the SEC right now, is consistently above average. You want to break that plane. You want to be, if you want to be considered one of the elites, you have to be able to get over that hump and actually put not only the paper product, but actually the product on the field. And I think that's why so many people have had A&M in the butt of their 8-4 jokes so far, is because they haven't been able to get over that hump so far. But with these quarterbacks, I think you are going to find these tough games that you have to step up in. And those DBs are going to have a great night to showcase those skills.
I think you just mentioning the tough games that we have, I think hump that we haven't been able to get over, aside from Florida last year kind of breaking the streak, is winning those road games. I mean, you get into week 3, you're playing at Notre Dame, which isn't a conference game, but it is still a very important away game and a chance for you to set your identity and tone for the rest of the season. And I think a big thing we have to get over we have 3 big away games. I mean, we have Mizzou and Arkansas, which shouldn't be looked over on the schedule, but just in terms of what we know about college football, Notre Dame, LSU, and Texas are easily our 3 biggest away games. And I think you have to win at least one of those games to even consider changing the identity of your program.
Yeah, definitely one of those. I think the Aggies want their get back when they go to Indiana to take on Notre Dame, and that's why that week 3 game I'm kind of pegging as one there that is kind of the must win. Besides going into Austin, I think that's the one where you're looking at, you want to get that get back, you want to be able to showcase how tough you are as a program, and I mean, let's be honest. They had a lot. Notre Dame had a lot of players drafted and leave their program, but they're still going to be one of those more elite teams. I mean, they reloaded. They have a next man up mentality. I think Marcus Freeman does an incredible job with their program over there, with their culture that he sets. And now that Mike Elko is kind of doing the same thing about establishing a culture, I think we're going to see the culture come out on the field with the Aggies this year, because last year it was kind of still setting that tone, instilling that culture. I think that culture has been set, and I think that they are going to finally show that they can get over this hump come this season. I think that Notre Dame, you're exactly right. One of those games you definitely have to win in a marquee matchup. It's going to be tough for all of those games. Like, let's be honest, it's going to be tough. I don't think a lot of teams want to see just smash mouth football all the time, but that's really what it's going to be, is smash mouth football. You're going to want to toughen it out and get over the hump, and you need to win these games.
Again, I think Notre Dame can be argued for this title, but if you were a college football fan, you're looking at A&M as a whole, you're looking at their schedule, and you had to circle one game on their schedule that you would call the prove it game, that would make you decide, is this team legit or are they just the same old that we see every year?
If I had to give one game, that's going to be tough. I think the one that comes off the top of my head, the prove it game to me, is Florida. I think Florida is going to be those games, because at that point you're going to be already at the point in the season where you've played 4+, or I believe it's the 5th game of the season is when Florida comes to town at A&M. I believe it's the end of September. And I think that, or I could be wrong, but I think that's one of the games that you look at, and Florida's not a team that is going to be exactly how they were this past year, where it was a little bit dysfunctional at the start. You're going to have a 5-star quarterback from the state of Texas playing at quarterback for the Florida Gators. And I think that's one of those games where it's, hey, you got to prove it on the field. It's tough team versus tough team. If you are able to get over that, I think at that point in the season, you're going to have a better positive record if you do beat them. That's the thing, is you could have this incredible record going into that game, but if you lose it, it might not all be for something, right? So I think Florida's the one I'm looking at right now. You could say that it's the road game against LSU, because at that point, you could either be at the highest 7-0 going into that game. You could be 4-3 going into that game. You don't know. So that's why I think it's going to be an earlier part of the season. And that's why I think it's Florida.
I can definitely see that being a big game on our schedule. It just comes down to where you stand with Florida as a whole. I think they are heavily reliant on DJ Lagway. That is their identity. Their offense is built around him, and I think their team as a whole is going to be determined by how well DJ Lagway performs. And especially because it's a home game, I think that sets up our identity. If that is our toughest at home game, can we take care of business at home? Because I think if we end the year undefeated at home, that sets a standard that is not been followed in years prior. So I am hoping to see a win there. I don't think it's going to be a night game. I think It's the second weekend of October.
This is the second.
Same weekend as Red River. So
Gotcha.
that will be a jam-packed weekend, but I am very excited for Florida to come into Kyle Field. It will look a lot different than it did this past year. I think that was kind of that is not the standard for Florida. We've seen a lot of games between Florida, like 2020 and Kyle Field, came down to a field goal in the last second. That is more so what the standard typically is. On the flip side of that, we have a lot of interesting games on our schedule that could easily be looked over. Do you have one that you think is, I guess, what you would call like a trap game? I guess a team that is not expected to be good, a team that is not high in anyone's mind, but you could easily see A&M just giving it up.
I don't necessarily think I have a game that would necessarily be a given trap game, because I think that the Aggies going into this year are better than they were in year one. So you don't necessarily have a trap game on your schedule. You have games that you could say are just like, hey, don't underestimate them, but it's not as drastic as it would be a trap game. But the one that comes to mind is the game now at Arkansas. Now, Arkansas has A&M hasn't lost to Arkansas at their place since, I believe, 2011, 2013, really since the start of when A&M kind of joined the SEC. So when they finally said that we're now doing the home and homes again with Arkansas, I saw it as, hey, it's a little bit of a vibe change. You could be disoriented going into that for one reason or another. I mean, Arkansas, their fan base takes it very, very seriously. And I think that's one of those games where if you skip over it, you might be a little bit more lost than what you could be looking for going into that one, because a lot of their fans are already pegging their head coach to not be on their team come this following season. I don't think that that's necessarily a knock on their head coach, Sam Pittman, because I do think he's more of an underrated coach at this time. I just think that he hasn't really been put in the position to succeed as much as Arkansas wants him to. But this could be a year where he just starts playing all out, and they've had so much attrition on their roster that a lot of unfamiliar faces could also be a lot of unfamiliarity when it comes to scouting them. So that's one where it's a lot of unknown, and it could be one of those games where you lose by a last-second field goal, or just something happens where you're not expecting it, and it goes other than the Aggies' way that day. That's one I'm looking at, but like I said, I don't think there's necessarily a trap game on their schedule. Maybe one again in South Carolina. And I know people are wanting me to mention Lenore Sellers or South Carolina as one of those teams again. I just think that South Carolina has lost so much on their defensive side, even though they may honestly have the best offensive and defensive player in the SEC at the end of the season. Like, that could happen. I just think a lot of what South Carolina had last year defensively, especially at that safety position with Nick Emanawari, they don't have guys like that anymore. They do have Dylan Stewart, but I don't know if they have those exact same playmakers that they had on that defensive side in that game. So that's why I think Arkansas is a little bit more of a trap game, if you wanted to say it.
Yeah, I have the exact same game circled in my mind. Arkansas is always a very interesting team to play. I think probably 90% of the games we played against them have come down to the last 2 minutes or in overtime. It just always ends up being that way, no matter how good or bad Arkansas is. And especially us going in to their stadium this year, who knows what could happen. Given the talent that I know both teams have or don't have, I would expect A&M to win that game. But again, it's Arkansas. There is just something in the air when it comes to them. Going into the SEC as a whole, I think before we even cover that, there obviously news today that we will now be doing a 9-game schedule, which very interesting news, especially after hearing what we heard yesterday just about how teams are going to be graded going into the playoffs. So very interesting timing there. Believe what you want or don't want to believe if those two things are connected. But talking about that, who do you want to see as A&M's 3 permanent opponents? And then how do you think this just affects the SEC as a whole?
So first of all, I think this is exactly where the SEC should have gone from the start. I shared Greg Sankey's kind of mentality that the SEC should have another conference game to showcase exactly what the SEC had as toughness on their schedule, because I think the quality of depth in the SEC is a little bit larger than a lot of other Power Four or all the other Power Four conferences out there. And this is a way to showcase that, right? That's all Sankey wanted. So I think when these new metrics came out, that's how they were going to be deciding a little bit more of these straight seeded 12-team playoff for this year. I'm not surprised that this happened sooner rather than later. Now, who would I like to see? I think Texas is the one that you kind of are saying that one has to be on there. But I really do think the other two, and you can kind of mix and match if you want to, but I think the ones that are most likely going to be talked about the most are LSU and Arkansas. Even though I personally would love to see Oklahoma every year as a permanent opponent, you could have this roundabout of Texas, Oklahoma, and A&M always playing. I don't think that that's as important to what the people who make schedules, whether that's athletic directors or people who work for these high-level programs. I think Texas, LSU, and Arkansas are the ones I'm looking out for in terms of those are some permanent opponents you're going to see every year.
I think the probably 99% of any A&M fans' expectations. I don't really expect to not see those three teams. They released a list of what they were kind of drafting, and I saw Mississippi State on there. I would be happy never playing a Mississippi team again, strictly because I don't even want to get into it, but anyone who watches A&M football knows why Mississippi is cursed. I know for sure that this is not going to change the fact that we will probably never play Georgia. That's another game that somehow has never landed on our schedule except for once. Before 2020, I don't remember what year, but again, I think those three teams are ones that we can expect to see. I am excited. I think SEC football is very high caliber. Are we still going to play Cupcake in November? Probably. That's just the way that it is. But getting into all of the SEC teams, all of the teams that we can expect to see as a whole this year, I need to know one team that you would characterize as overrated, and then one team that you would characterize as underrated.
It just specifically in the SEC, because I could go on and on about certain teams.
SEC. We'll leave it at SEC for now.
One that I think is going to be criminally underrated come the end of the season, I think that's probably going to be Missouri. I think Missouri probably has one of the easiest schedules when it comes to the SEC, but I think people are kind of crapping on that schedule too much. Now, their win total, I believe, for this season, if you were to go by betting odds, I believe is around 7.5 or 8.5. But their schedule, it favors them a lot, where they get a lot of the tougher teams at home. But if they can exactly figure out how they win those games, it's the style and manner that they win those games. And I think going into last season, we didn't fully expect them to come out with one of the more kind of explosive looking offenses, especially when you looked at it on TV. You had guys like Theo Weiss and Luther Burden with Cook back there that people wanted to tune in to watch kind of exactly how they were throwing the ball to these elite receivers. So I think people are kind of putting them off to the side and not exactly paying attention to them as much. I think they could finish as well as 10-2 if they play their cards right. I have them placed kind of around the 8-4, 9-3 range, but I think that come the end of the season, I think it's how they put the talent on the field that's going to take a lot of people by surprise. Now, overrated, it's tough because I don't think a lot of teams in the SEC are exactly overrated. I think one that comes to mind where I don't think we'll see a lot of the prowess that we saw last year because of last year's team and the talent that they had is Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss offensively is going to look pretty much, they're going to be close to what we saw last year. And I have a lot of faith that Austin Simmons, their new starting quarterback, is going to be as good as advertised. I just don't think you have the necessary playmakers like you did last year with Texas A&M transfer Walter Nolan along the defensive line. You had two guys in the defensive secondary who I believe were ranked in the top 30 of like PFF grades when it comes to pass coverage. So I don't think you necessarily have that full talent. And they were a top 5 defense last year nationally. Now, does that mean that they drop all the way to bottom 50? No, I don't think so. But I do think that those numbers take a considerable dip. So I don't think a lot of teams are overrated in the SEC. I just think that a lot of teams are going to either take a hit when it comes to offensive or defensive production based on last season. And I think Ole Miss is one of those teams.
Yeah, I've got two different ones that come to mind for me. I'm very mixed about Missouri. I kind of expect to see the opposite. I kind of expect to see a downgrade from last year. I think they underperformed last year, and I especially expect to see them underperform this year. I just don't think they have, even with the weapons they had last year, they didn't perform up to standard. So I don't see them doing better than maybe 7-5. We will see. My underrated team, which you could argue that they aren't underrated. I think people are very mixed bag about this team, is Oklahoma. I am not 100% bought in to John Mateer, but the fact that he came in with his offensive coordinator, so he doesn't have to learn a new system, on top of having better weapons than he had in the Pac-12, with Brent Venables playing for his job, I would expect them to be underrated in the sense that 6-7 is not the standard at Oklahoma, and I would expect to see them win at minimum 8 games. I think they beat Michigan right off the bat. What is that, week 2? So I am expecting a lot bigger things. I would not be surprised at all if they go into Red River and both teams are undefeated. That would not shock me one bit. Again, they could be 2-3, who knows? But
That's a great storyline. Like
yeah,
if both teams were undefeated going into that shootout game, I would definitely kind of be living to hear to see it.
I think the SEC and Greg Sankey would be drooling at the mouth to see that happen.
100%.
Who knows? But given what I've heard coming out of their camp, what I know from what they're returning and what they brought in with the portal, I'm expecting a big step up. And I think Brent Venables has a little bit of an ego to where he just can't let that team perform the way that they did last year. In terms of overrated, like this is going to be my MO until they prove me wrong. It's going to be LSU. And that is a bit of personal bias. But at the same time, a lot of their pieces are reliant on hoping that they all mesh. They're throwing a bunch of guys in a blender and expecting to make a smoothie, and I don't know if they can do that. They lost 4 guys on their O-line. They said they brought in 4 great guys from the portal. I'm not high on Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, I was at the game when he threw 3 picks. I watched him give away the game in South Carolina. Like, I don't think he is an elite quarterback. I don't think he's a Heisman contender. I think he's a good quarterback. He plays for an SEC team. He's a good quarterback. I don't think he's great. They've underperformed defensively for the past 2 years, especially 2 years ago. They brought in a lot of new pieces there that we don't know what to expect there. And Brian Kelly just hasn't shown that he can be an elite coach. And he's arguably playing for his job there too, because LSU has a national championship standard. I mean, they fired Ed Ogeron 2 years after winning the national championship. So they are not going to sit around and be okay with 8-4 year after year. So that is my overhyped team. Garrett Nussmeier can feel free to prove me wrong. Until then, I will stand firm in that fact.
All right. I think one of the questions along those, I think, where do you have them rated? First of all, when it comes to it, so I think a lot of people are expecting them to be one of these top 5 finishers when it comes to the SEC, maybe even top 3. So where do you have them originally placed where other people would have them rated to where now that you are overrating them?
I think you have tier 1 in the SEC, which is Texas, Georgia, and Bama. I think that's very clear. And then tier 2 this year, I think it's a lot of money. And you can kind of interchange where you have those teams ranked. You have A&M, LSU, Ole Miss, even throwing Auburn. Tennessee could arguably be in there. There's a lot of teams that make up tier 2. and you can't have them all going 7-5. Someone's going to have to make a name for themselves and jump up to tier 1, and you're going to have guys who are falling out of tier 2. And I think LSU is a tier 2 team that people expect to see jump up to tier 1, and I think I see them falling to the bottom of the pack, and that's like a probably 8-4, not ceiling, but an 8-4 record. So that is not up to standard. I think a lot of people have them going 10-2, 11-1, contending for a playoff spot, contending to be in Atlanta, and I just don't see that happening in Baton Rouge. Again, they could prove me wrong, but I am just not a believer that you can throw a bunch of guys on the field and see success immediately, which, I mean, if we were to get into college football as a whole, we could talk about Texas Tech and what they're doing with the transfer portal, but we will leave it at the SEC for now.
Sounds good.
But let's see. Is there another, because you talked about Ole Miss, they were a very good team last year. We will see how they look with Austin Simmons at the helm. Is there a team that you expect or maybe hope to see run the races with Texas, Georgia, Bama, or do you see those 3 teams kind of running away with it?
There's a lot of ifs when it comes to those SEC teams who are not kind of at that top level of recognition when it comes to the level of talent that people don't know because they haven't seen it on the field yet. So I think a lot of those people are talking about, your Bama, your Georgia, your Texas, because of the elite talent roster that they have. Now, I think when I think of like elite talent rosters, if I look across the entire SEC, I'm thinking right now that in the years that Hugh Freeze has been at Auburn, they did a gross malpractice with the previous coach who, let's be honest, did not recruit whatsoever to the level of standard that Auburn wanted. Now he's going into, I believe, what, year 4 now, year 4 or year 3, year 4, where he now has these expectations of being this coach who has taken a program to another level. So I look at Auburn's roster, I'm going, okay, they have this guy, Keldrick Folk, along the defensive line. He's, I would say, pretty dang good when it comes to SEC talents along defensive line. I think you have probably the second best wide receiver roster or top 2 when it comes to the national scene in Eric Singleton and Cam Coleman, only behind Jeremiah Smith and Brandon Inniss over at Ohio State. I think that when I look at their offensive line, I think it's their most experienced offensive line that Auburn has had in the past 7 or 8 years. So I think that if Hugh Freeze and Auburn aren't able to kind of take that next step, I definitely think they could, but a lot of it is hinging on what he's taken from the portal, especially with their quarterback. So they took 2 quarterbacks from the transfer portal, Ashton Daniels and Jackson Arnold. And Jackson Arnold, although he did have a lot of turnover issues when he was at Oklahoma, and sometimes that's not even something you can fix. Sometimes that is part of your DNA as a quarterback. I think a change of scenery was needed. So could he be this 5-star quarterback coming out of North Texas that everyone thinks he can be? I kind of am wanting to see it. Not necessarily that I'm wanting to see it against A&M, but this season they're one that I'm looking at that could cause a surprise when it comes to the whole SEC as a whole. But they could also drop off a cliff, and I'm not going to talk them off of that.
I think Auburn is a very hot and cold team coming into this year. Their wide receiver room has been talked about nationally. I think that is where their strength is. Obviously, the question mark comes with Jackson Arnold and the quarterback position as a whole. Obviously, you've probably heard when they asked Hugh Freeze about the quarterback situation. He says they could play 3 quarterbacks against Baylor. How do you interpret that answer?
I think that's probably more coach speak, to where I think the exact question was, could we see 3 quarterbacks against Baylor? I definitely think he's like, all right, well, you definitely could, but do I think that they will be playing all 3? I doubt you even see Deuce Knight a lot this season whatsoever. So I think that if you have to play another quarterback, it's going to be Ashton Daniels, who can give you a little bit more with his legs than Jackson Arnold can. But a lot of it is going to be, hey, we took this guy Jackson out of the portal. We're going to play him because he gives us a better chance at winning. That's why these coaches go out and get these players in the portal, is because these players give them a better chance at winning. So that first weekend matchup, that Friday night matchup against Baylor, I am super intrigued on, and I could not even tell you who could be winning that game. If you told me a week after that game that Auburn won by 25, I could believe you. But if you told me that Baylor kind of won by 2 scores, I wouldn't raise my eyebrow at that either.
Given the state of Auburn's program over the past 3 or 4 years, obviously we saw how they performed against us. It's not great when you make Peyton Thorne look like a good quarterback. So that was definitely helpful for them to gain some momentum going into the offseason. But Hugh Freeze is definitely still on the hot seat. What do you think it takes for him to keep his job and for Auburn to kind of get some of their identity back?
So for him to keep his job, I think is going to be a different question than getting their identity back, because I think Hugh Freeze can keep his job if he goes 7-5. Like, honestly, I really do think he can keep his job, because it is technically better than last season. Technically. Now, does that mean he could potentially keep his job if he goes 6-6 and looks a really good 6-6? I don't know. That's kind of up in the air, but I think if he goes 7-5 with one win against one of the top teams, whether that's in the Iron Bowl, whether that's somehow when Georgia comes to you, to Jordan-Hare, or maybe that's on the road at A&M, I don't know. But I do think that their identity is a program and a talent-rich state like Alabama. Now, they are competing with Kalen DeBoer at Alabama for those talent in the state. But just this past cycle, I believe Auburn kind of signed, I think, 5 or 6 out of the top 10 players out of Alabama just this past year in the 25 cycle. I could be wrong on my numbers there, but I'm pretty sure they did. So I think that now, to get their identity back, they have to be able to put a product on the field, especially on the offensive side of the ball, because I do think they'll be fine on defense. That's kind of, you want to see the standard raised there on the offensive side of the ball. That's why you went out to get someone like Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech, who is proven at that receiver position, and try and make it easier on Jackson Arnold.
And again, this I think is a sentiment that can be applied to probably half the teams in the SEC, is having a ceiling of 10-2 and having a floor of 5-7. Auburn is definitely no exception. I am looking forward to those wide receivers. I mean, Cam Coleman is a guy we could have had, similar to Ryan Williams. There's a lot of guys out there that could have been on our roster that weren't, that I'm still excited to watch play football. When it comes to the SEC as a whole, I think we might as well just throw out, who do you expect to see in Atlanta? Who do you expect to see win in Atlanta?
Leave it at that. Okay, yes. So who do I expect to see in Atlanta for that SEC championship? My picks are Alabama and Texas. I think Alabama has probably one of the best rosters when it comes to depth, besides A&M and Texas, that we're probably going to see in the SEC this year. I think Alabama may have one of the best defensive secondaries in all of college football, and they have absolute athletic freaks when it comes to the cornerback room. I mean, Dijon Lee is a 5-star freshman who is 6'4" and already going up and making Ryan Williams' job tough in practice. This has been coming out of their practice reports all the time. Ryan Williams has talked about how good their defensive back room is. I think Alabama is one of those teams that in year 2 under a coach like DeBoer, who I am exceptionally high on, and I think they got that hire right, I think that Alabama could cause a lot of commotion in this second year, and I actually have them winning the SEC championship barely against Texas. And that's not saying Texas is going to give, like, just kind of completely crap the bed. I think Texas is absolutely one of those teams that you cannot underestimate when it comes to how consistent they will be on the offensive side and how good their defensive capabilities are as well.
I think a very unique position we have this year is those tier one teams are all starting a new quarterback. I think I think all three of them have seen playing time, but none of them have ever been a starter to start the year, obviously. Ty Simpson, Gunnar Stockton, and Arch Manning, just for fun. He had to, let's say, buy, lease, and sell those three quarterbacks. Where is your head at with those three?
So I'm taking Georgia, Texas's, and
Yeah.
Alabama's.
Yeah.
Buy, lease, and sell. I think right now I am sell. If I have stock in any of them, I think I'm buying Arch Manning stock because I think that even right now, that stock is still going up. Now, whether that means he could stay another year in college football, I don't know, but I think I'd rather take that risk. I'd rather lease and hold my Ty Simpson stock when it comes to it because I don't think that he beat out guys like a true freshman Keelan Russell or someone uh, I forget the exact name of the quarterback who DeBoer brought over from Washington with him, but he's an absolute freak at a quarterback as well who can throw it exceptionally well. I think Ty Simpson, there's something to be talked about this mentality when you stay with the same program all this time, especially with the talent that you have. I think it's not to be underestimated what Ty Simpson could bring to that program. And let's just say he brings them B-level quarterback play at most. I think that's a team that is going to be in Atlanta if they get B-level quarterback play from him. And I think I'm selling right now Gunnar Stockton stock just because those are the options I have. I'm not saying Gunnar Stockton is going to be worse for wear at quarterback for Georgia. I think that right now, I just think the value with the other two is kind of where I'm leaning. If I could hold both Simpson and Stockton, I would. But with the options laid out for me, I don't think I can.
I think when it comes to Ty Simpson and Bama, they have a very unique problem where 9-3 is not good enough. Obviously, coming in and having to follow Nick Saban is not an easy feat, and Kalen DeBoer knows that. But he's also, I think, part of the 1% that is okay taking on that challenge. But when it comes to Bama, national championship is the standard. Being in Atlanta is almost the bare minimum. Do you think if Alabama doesn't make the SEC championship this year, that Kalen DeBoer's job is at risk?
No. I don't think I don't think he's at risk. Maybe he's at risk from the fans' perspective, but I think the brass over at Alabama within their athletic department kind of knows in the back of their head that they made the right decision when it comes to hiring someone after the stature that you had with Nick Saban over there. I mean, no one is going to come in and replace the best college football coach of all time and have the same standard. You may have the same morals and standards going forward for your program, but you're not going to come in and uphold the exact same thing that an entirely different person coach is going to have. I think that, like I said before, I'm super high on Kalen DeBoer. I think he doesn't have a win percentage of just less than I believe like 11 or 12% for a reason. He's won a lot of games at a lot of programs. Now, he comes in now with high expectations from the fans, and fans have kind of been spoiled since around 2007, 2006 when Saban came over. So they've had this almost 20-year period where they've been consistently great when it comes to college football, and they've become this dynasty under Saban. So now it's kind of that reshuffling and restructuring of someone's own psyche when it comes to fans. And I think they have to get ready to kind of be under Kalen DeBoer's own mentality and kind of get used to that first. And of course, he's going to want to have these 10-2, 11-1 seasons and win these SEC championships. He said it so himself. That's their main goal before going on to win a national championship. I think that he probably if he were to go 8-4, I think it would get a little bit tenuous, but I don't think that that is something that I'm looking at right now where his job is on the line. But a regression from 9-3 to 8-4, that would kind of be the only thing where I'm thinking of like I don't think his job security is necessarily in question.
Yeah, and I think it's a very clear consensus across any college football fan that if Alabama bounces back and goes 12-0 and wins the SEC championship, is in the playoffs, it's not going to be a surprise at all. 9-3 is not the standard. It is an exception at Alabama. No one's going to be shocked to see them in Atlanta. I personally think it's going to be Texas and Atlanta, and then it's going to come down to a tiebreaker between Bama and Georgia. And I'm pretty sure that Bama's playing at Georgia this year, and I don't think that Georgia loses at home. So I think that it will be Georgia and Texas, which is a rematch of last year. And as much as it pains me to say, I think Texas wins this one, but I also get a little bit of a win-win situation because my prediction is either right or they lose. So that's a win-win for me.
You
But
think
I
you have a
do,
win-win mentality for it.
yes, 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 yes. So, I mean, maybe that is a little bit of a, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but that is what I foresee happening. We will see. Obviously, the SEC I think it has a lot more depth this year in terms of who we could see rise out of that tier two. And I would not be surprised if one of those top three teams is not the winner of the SEC. I think there are easily a lot of dark horses that we could argue about for a very long time. So we will see come December who kind of ends up making a name for themselves, or if it's just same old, same old. But college football, I think we are very excited for the year ahead. Before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit. This is your niche, just about recruiting and kind of what Elko has been doing over this past season, coming in, getting to build his own team, and how much the culture, as much as that is coach speak, how much the culture has shifted from the way that Jimbo recruited to the way that Elko recruited. So kind of give me your elevator pitch of what is the key difference between those two styles of recruiting and the types of players that each coach is looking for.
Yeah, so when I started kind of this journey of kind of covering recruiting for Texas A&M in the way that I do, I started out with how Jimbo recruited. Now, I've talked to many a recruit who said that they love Jimbo, and that it was a lot of the reasons why they came to A&M in the first place was just plainly because of how Jimbo acted and was towards them, whether that was his personality, how he came off, how and I'm sure probably money did come down to it as well. Like that does happen a lot now. But I think the change now that I'm seeing when I talk to these recruits and these prospective talents that are coming in is the first thing that comes out of their mouth when they talk about this A&M recruiting staff is family. That's been the main thing that's kind of been preached so far, especially as one. This coaching staff, Mike Elko, a lot of his assistant coaches and recruiters, that's their mentality they're preaching is the A&M and the Aggie program. It's one big family that wants to get consistently better and wants to develop. It's development and it's family. Those are the two things I hear every time. I didn't necessarily hear that under the previous regime, but I knew that the previous regime under Jimbo Fisher, a lot of the times their recruiting pitches, what we were going to develop you no matter what, but I don't think it was necessarily an emphasis on that family that Mike Elko wants, that connection. That's the main thing that has been going through a lot. And that's the main reason why this 2026 class, which right now is a top 7 rated class in 2026, that's all they've been preaching so far. That's why you've seen a lot of kids already shut down their recruitments so far in 2026.
And I think we are not shy to seeing great recruiting classes come out of A&M. I think the key difference comes, obviously there are whispers of A&M potentially having another number 1 recruiting class, which I think this time around gives people a lot of trauma and hesitation because we saw what happened in 2021. What would you say is, I mean, you kind of covered the key differences, but what, I guess, again, this is copium or advice or comfort do you have to offer people that this time around can certifiably be different?
Well, I think the main difference is, and I've talked about this a bunch with other people who cover the space so far, is that A&M's classes as of right now, they're not beating out 5 stars like they did in the 2022 class. Well, for better for worse, they're not beating out other teams who are not necessarily those Georgias or Alabamas. They beat out a lot of people in that 22 class, where maybe the other competition wasn't as to the level of those elite programs. I think that now that they are recruiting the specific player that is, hey, we want the athlete, we want those developmental traits on the team first, and we'll figure out exactly what that is when you get to campus and that family feel. You want to have those ground up development traits. And that's what they're taking. They're making these evaluations early. I think back last year to a guy like Chase Sims, who was outside the top 350 in terms of every recruiting service out there. And then by the end of recruiting rankings, I think he was a top 90 player when it came to a lot of services. So they identified that early, and Texas came on late for someone like Chase Sims and try to get him on campus during the season. That ended up not happening because A&M made those evaluations early, and Chase Sims is now one of the better developmental prospects who I could see under a training regimen like this one in 2 to 3 years be one of those like absolute monsters when it comes to defensive line talent. So I think that's what they're looking for now, is not necessarily the most flashy like Jimbo was. And to his credit, sometimes flash is what gets people in seats, and flash is what people want to see on television, because at the end of the day, it is entertainment now that college football is here, and it's exciting. It's very, very exciting. But I think it's more exciting when you're able to put a product on the field that is consistently exactly what you know it's going to be every year, and that's going to be building more and more on those developmental talents and be consistently better. I think that's what people are looking at so far. So I think this class, now that it's top 10, and it could change before the end of the season, could go better, could go worse. I think having these classes go forward as a top 10 class, those are what they're looking for.
I think this year, obviously, this is a good problem to have. With the team that we're going to put onto the field, we're not going to see a ton of true freshmen, which is great in terms of depth. Do you expect any of our recruits out of the class of 2026 to make an immediate impact coming onto the field next year?
Oh, next year,
Yeah, no,
not
no,
this
no,
current
yeah.
season, but next. That is a little bit tough because I don't know if I can necessarily project them until they sign with A&M come December. I think one of the kids that has a lot of people turning heads when it comes to their senior year of high school is a kid like, and we've already seen him so far playing 1 or 2 games for his high school in Buford, Georgia, and that's a kid like Bryce Perry Wright, who I think could be one of those developmental prospects. I don't know if he'd necessarily be on the field starting game 1 next year, but he's one of those kids where you need to take them because otherwise, or I shouldn't say otherwise, but he's one of those kids where if you are getting him in the right developmental program, he could become one of the premier pass rushers in the SEC. And another one is Brandon Arrington. This is a guy who is a 2-sport like superstar. He's exceptional in track. He's broken a lot of California state records when it comes to dashes. His nickname literally is Dash. So Brandon Arrington is one of those kids where I see having an immediate impact regardless of where he goes. And that doesn't mean he necessarily impacts the team by what he's doing on the field, but it's his mentality. It's him wanting to get better. He wants to go to the next level. That's part of the recruiting pitches when it came down to Oregon and A&M. He just wanted to get to the next level. He wants to be better. And I think that's the mentality that the Aggies want to
And
have.
I think Brandon Arrington is one I had written down and one I'm really excited about. Really headlines the difference in terms of culture and what Elko was looking for in his guys, in that I kind of made this comparison on Twitter a couple weeks ago, is that he kind of has that like Bobby Taylor mentality of being really bought into A&M as a whole and not just for the on-field product, but what A&M can do for you for the 4 years or however long you end up being there and the rest of your life, whether that is what for him, it probably is the NFL, but whatever it ends up being post A&M. So I am really excited for him specifically, kind of circling back to what we alluded to. Do you have any true freshmen that you expect to see make an impact this year on? this roster.
I 100% see Marco
Yeah.
Jones on the field. I think Marco Jones is the kid that you are wanting to see on the field if you're an A&M fan. I think you're going to know the name. He's going to be one of these people that's either right behind Cassius Howell or right behind Dayon Hayes as one of these edge rushers that is going to take you by surprise. A&M had Marco Jones as one of the best recruiting wins they had in 2025. He was the top defensive end edge player on their recruiting board. And this is above guys like Xavier Griffin, who went to Georgia, who's, I believe, is the top edge or defensive line recruit under Kirby Smart. They had him over guys like Elijah Griffin, over guys like, if I went back into that recruiting class, he was number one on their offer sheet. So that's a major, major recruiting win. And this is a guy who is a dual sport athlete. Like he's a very, very good baseball player as well. But in terms of his like intensity and level of athleticism, he's a guy that I think that is going to make an immediate impact when it comes to A&M this coming season.
I had the exact same name circled on my list. I mean, if the spring game is obviously not a perfect representation of what your team is going to look like, but when you hear that a guy has 6 sacks, whether or not it is a spring game, that is going to turn heads no matter what. So I fully expect to see him get reps and could arguably even see him starting for us. We have depth there, I think, so it is a good problem to have that we can kind of cycle those guys in there. So we will see him a lot. I'm really hoping to see him a lot. So that is the main one that I had circled as well. So we're kind of on the same wavelength there. But before we wrap up the show, I have one final segment, which I'm calling the fire pit. And if anyone was following me this summer, they knew that because we were in the pits when it came to sports and there was nothing to watch because I don't watch Major League Baseball, I was watching a lot of Love Island. And if you watch Love Island, you know about the fire pit and you know about what goes down at the fire pit. So we are going to every week, this is what's going to be, you're going to give me one hot take when it comes to A&M football and one hot take when it comes to college football as a whole.
Let's see. I think I'll start with the college football take because I think that is going to be, and I've stood on this for the past couple weeks. I've thought of what are the crazy things that I could realistically see happen, but also could be one of those things where you kind of don't believe it when you see it on your screen. So for college football as a whole, I'm trying to say which one that doesn't get me, kind of ridiculed all over social media. But I think that this year you could see a defensive player in the Heisman voting. I think you're going to see a defensive finalist as one of the final 4 Heisman candidates. I don't think that's talked about enough. That some of the levels of defender now, there are a lot of eyes on these quarterbacks going to be coming out of certain situations. I think that you're going to see a defensive player come out of nowhere and start taking the entire college football by surprise. So I think whether that maybe could be a Colin Simmons over at Texas, whether that is a Caleb Downs over in Ohio State, I think he's one that I have immense respect for, and I think he could be one of the players that just takes over all of college football. I think I'm going to stand on that soapbox for this year, and if not this year, I think it's going to be happening real soon. So that's my college football one, and I think for the Aggies, and I've said it kind of over on my show as well, that I think the Aggies before you go into Notre Dame, I think the entire running back room combines for 7 plus touchdowns. Like that may not be necessarily a hot take, but I think it's something that is a standard that can be achieved. And I think that to put a little bit of icing on top of that, I think Ruben Owens will have 3 of those.
I would love that. I think that'd be awesome. When it comes to college football, I like to pay attention to guys who we recruited and didn't end up signing here. And I've seen names like Anthony Hill and Harold Perkins be thrown around as Heisman contenders. Obviously, they're going to be a a huge impact on their individual defenses, but I honestly wouldn't be shocked to see a name like that on the list. I think obviously everyone's mind goes to quarterbacks, and if it's 4 quarterbacks, that it is what it is. But hot take, we will run with that. Mine is a little more specific when it comes to college football. And this is just because maybe it's just because I'm a fan of Haynes King, but I think we will see Georgia Tech in the ACC championship. I think everyone's talking about Clemson and Miami, rightfully so, but I am bought into Georgia Tech. I think one, Haynes King. I am sad that he didn't perform here, but I'm glad to see him living up to the hype at Georgia Tech. Chase Lane is over there too. I love that kid. But I think they start the season against Colorado, I believe, and I think they run away with that game. In conference, they have Clemson at home, which is a good draw, and then I don't think they play another ranked team in their conference. So I would not be shocked at all to see them play in the ACC championship. I think it will be against Clemson, but I am rooting for them anytime. There are minor exceptions, but anytime an A&M player transfers, I am heavily rooting for them. Cough Noah Thomas, but I'm not going to get into that.
Hey, speaking of people that transferred out of A&M, I had said that I'm kind of a little bit more down on South Carolina's defense this year. That may not be the case as one of my guys is Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy is now over there, and he's been making a case to be their starting defensive tackle. So I may be a little bit higher on South Carolina now that I think about it.
Again, it's a similar situation to Auburn and tons of other teams. They easily have the assets, especially on offense, to run away from tier 2, but they could be the same old 8-4 that we know ourselves as. I think looking at A&M, my hot take, and I've said this already, and I'm going to stand on it, and I already alluded to it in the show, is I think we beat LSU at Death Valley. We haven't done that in almost 30 years, maybe 30 plus years. That matchup typically tends to favor the home team. But given what I've said about LSU, I think A&M can win at Death Valley, and I think that is going to be a huge staple on our schedule, and it's going to help lift us out of that 8-4 hole. So that is a hill that I'm going to die on. But there you go, internet. Bookmark this for December. We can come back and revisit, or maybe not, depending on how horribly these go off the rails. But that is all I have for today. Throw a like out there, throw a subscribe out there. There are buttons somewhere down there. Thank you for joining us. Kannon, let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me over specifically on X at Torres Kannon, and over on Patreon. I run a Patreon covering Texas A&M football and basketball recruiting. So go check it out over at Bell Tower Intel over on Patreon. There's going to be a lot of fun stuff coming this season, and I'm super excited to give it all to you.
Yes, so thank you, Kannon, for joining me today on my very first show. It was a whirlwind, and I am very glad that you decided to join today. And thank you, everyone who's watching, who decided to pick me over Josh Pate. I don't take that lightly. That means so much to me, and I will remember you forever. And you can go watch Josh Pate now because we are wrapping up the show. So thank you, everyone. I am very excited to see you all next week, and very excited to see you all in 9 days when we play UTSA. So have a great night, everyone.